Quantum computers. This is Intelligent Performance.
Ator Tetenta, welcome to the Intelligent Performance Podcast. An absolute pleasure to have you with us. And coming in from beautiful Calgary, Canada this morning, or your afternoon by the looks of things. Ator, first of all, welcome. And for those who don't know, Ator, you're very much a specialist in the world of procurement. You've done some massive transactions, so $250 million worth of submersible pumping, which is what we're going to look into and kind of talk about the world of procurement and getting it right and bringing a intelligent performance lens to how the hell do you get procurement right. So firstly, Ator, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Michael. Really appreciate being here with you.
Yeah, it's awesome. So first question, as with all guests, is what is your take on intelligent performance, Ator?
The world is very competitive. So if you can figure out how to buy a little smarter than the next guy, that means you're applying some intelligence to that process. So to me, it comes down to harnessing the information that is available to you so you can buy smarter and you can outperform the next guy. Very generic, but that's kind of what I think about.
No, I love that. That's cool. And super relatable, right? And I think you've worked on some massive transactions. So for some of the biggest companies and corporations on the planet, you've worked with QAT Oil. So you're literally representing governments or kind of sovereign entities to help them navigate this kind of procurement. And I often think about the oil and gas sector. It's such a massive one, and the numbers involved must be so significant that if you can find efficiencies in some sort of way along that, the knock-on impact must be extraordinary in terms of these transactions. So let's just talk. You mentioned just before we jumped on, your biggest transaction was a $250 million submersible pump transaction. So I'm curious, what is it like to go shopping with $250 million in your pocket?
Oh boy. I should be answering that question today. All right, let's step back a little bit. It is very confusing because when you have a big budget like that, typically you're not told exactly what to do with it. Everybody's focusing on the end result and the outcome. So when you have a big budget like that, you have to fight, number one, the confusion. And the confusion normally starts with, where is the information? You kind of have a good idea where you're going, but how to get there, how to get all the bits and pieces that you need in order to be able to get there can be very, very challenging. Does that answer the question?
I think so. And I'm thinking about this, it would be specifically confusing because I find the way a lot of people sell or promote their products is that they can solve problems, right? And it's very tricky to actually figure out what a person's company product actually does, its competencies. So many companies or salespeople are focused on just delivering the sale because that's how they're incentivized, whereas the company has a very different buying driver. And I imagine at that scale, there is a real competition about just say yes, because everyone wants to transact with Shell. I think you mentioned prior with this, right? They just see dollar signs, I would imagine. So getting the right information would be extremely difficult, especially doing like due diligence and actually checking they can fulfill.
Indeed. Actually, when you work with some of the largest companies in the world, and it also translates to some of the smaller companies as well, everybody wants the same outcome. Now, when you're a large corporation, you have the tools and the resources, but they might not all be in the same place. So even that on its own, with all that capability that is around you, being able to harness it, find it, structure it, so that you can get the desired outcome can be pretty challenging. And then after that, navigating this internal stakeholders before you begin to look at your external stakeholders. That's another completely different set of challenges as well. So when you have a big dollar, even small dollar budget that you want to go shopping with, if one has to almost step back I'd almost break it back down to the fundamentals. I say, okay, what is my desired outcome? A lot of people talk about life cycle cost. The great thing about life cycle cost is it is so relatable, but the difficulty around that is actually proving it out. Because by the time you deliver the final solution or product, most people have moved on in their careers, moved on to different locations and so on and so forth. So where you started and where you're finally going to wind up might be totally poles apart. So when you take on a big project and you're looking at that, you want to step back and say, okay, how can we get to document the desired outcome, and then document how we're going to get there, and also document what it is that we did in order to get there, so that you can go back down the road and then benchmark and say, did we actually get what we're looking for? Does that make sense?
I'm curious, in a context like this, you're looking for these submersible pumps, and just maybe in your answer here, provide us a bit of context. But what the hell is a submersible pump? It seems straightforward, but maybe I'm sure it sounds like there's a bit more to it. But how many are in your team trying to navigate kind of these transactions and kind of doing product evaluations and et cetera, or DD or testing?
All right. So let's talk about the 3 people in any transaction.
Right.
There's a buyer, as in buyer company, there's a seller company, and there's an individual in the transaction. Okay. So most people think that you generally have only 2 sides to any transaction, but there are actually 3 sides.
Right.
Okay. So you start from the buyer company. What does the buyer company want? The buyer company wants a product for an outcome.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The seller company wants to sell the product or service at the maximum price that they can.
Yeah.
And then the individual in the middle that is handling the transaction from either side of a transaction also has their own requirements and needs.
Yep.
Now, is that a career? Is that a promotion? Is that ease of doing things, and so on and so forth? You have to identify the 3 stakeholders in there. Now, once you identify the 3 stakeholders, then you begin to structure your end result and outcome to be able to take all those people out. So let's talk about, let me start from the buyer side, because I've been on the buyer side as well as on the seller side. I worked on the producer side and then transitioned over to the service provider side. So I've seen it from both sides of the equation.
Yeah.
So let's take one particular project. It wasn't as big as 250 million. This was just over 100 million. And in that particular transaction, the objective was to get submersible pumping, contract negotiated, everything I worked in a year. It took about 2.5 years to get it done.
Well,
because when we started, what we found out was the traditional transaction was go out, X amount of money, go out and buy a submersible pump. A submersible pump, for those that are not aware of or familiar with it, it's a pump that you would put in the ground to produce fluid to surface. In the oil industry, in the particular project that I'm talking about right here, it's an electric submersible pump, also known as ESPs. So they would vary in size, volume, capacities, and horsepowers and so on. So again, depending on the size of the pump that you're running, the complete system could vary from $100,000 to $750,000 to $1 million per unit, depending again on different characteristics of the reservoir and the production that you require. So looking at this transaction from the purchaser side, we had to we found out that what we're doing on a regular basis was basically put a pump in the ground, it will run for X amount of days and it will fail, you go put another one in the ground. Well, you can imagine that for very expensive units, that's not very intelligent way of doing it. So we step back and say, okay, what can we change in the process? Everybody was used to pump fails, you buy another one, you pay cash for it, and then you replace it. So we took it and said, okay, first of all, how long are these pumps running for? and how many different locations or fields are these running in, and what are the different characteristics of these fields. Then we went in to understand how the pumps were performing in the different fields that we're going to be installing them in. Where you would think that a big company would have all that information at your fingertip. Well, it wasn't there. And this challenge is not unique to one company. It's not unique to one geography. It's not even unique to one vertical. So first of all, you have to gather the information of where you're going to use it, how it's going to perform, who is going to work with it, what is their competency level, and so on and so forth. Understanding that is kind of your foundational work. Once you understand that and you've done your foundational work, then you have to send it to your internal stakeholders, especially if you're going to try to do something that is out of the ordinary, something that is slightly different from what everybody is used to doing.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Now, as you navigate that, and that could be extremely challenging depending on the size of the organization you have. Okay. If you have a small team where one or two people make all the decisions, if they have a very fixed experience that is not so good with a certain, in a certain space, they might not agree to even listen to you. They'll shut you down. If it's a 2 or 3 man organization, it becomes very, very difficult for you to find other potential stakeholders that you can use to navigate the outcome that you want. Now, if you work in a bigger organization, there could be other stakeholders that you'd have to then get on board to help you navigate that. Ultimately, all of this take time. If you had the data available that you could very easily quantify the different elements of of the outcome that you want, and then you can model it and then, show the outcome in a way that people can relate to, then it becomes a lot easier for you to address the front end side of it. But once you've addressed the front end side of it, which is the buyer side of it, then you have to figure out how to communicate that to the sellers so that you can also meet their own stakeholder requirements. And their stakeholder requirements is to be able to execute the transaction in a profitable manner to themselves. Is that making sense?
Yeah, it is. So I think you're saying, is that when you're on the seller side, so when you were selling to the quote unquote the buyer over here, that you having to help the buyer access the right data such that they can evaluate the purchase correctly. Have I got that right?
Absolutely.
So yeah. And is that because the buyer often doesn't know the right data or can't access the data?
It could be a combination of things. And the worst thing you want to do is to go in and tell a buyer that he doesn't fully understand his business. You met an enemy alive. So you don't, so that on its own comes down to, if you remember, I mentioned the three sides of any transaction, the buyer company, the seller company, and the individuals in the transaction. So knowing your buyer and understanding what their key issues are from an individual perspective, right, before addressing the organization, helps you figure out what you need to communicate. So that communication and education process is very, very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. I'm curious, the amount of stakeholders at that level, and I'm talking about this 250 million, 100 million, either way, for a lot of people speaking to this, that would be a big number. It sounds like the number of stakeholders in that game would be significant. You need a lot of people to say yes in that and appease, satisfy a lot of people. Is that actually the reality, or do you find it's more like there's just the one person or the one team that if you get them on board, actually it all really moves pretty smooth?
Okay. No, it's not one team. It's not one person. So that's not I wish you.
I thought you were going to drop a bombshell.
I wish you
the nugget.
Okay, let me describe one particular project. Okay. So one particular project, we actually, the operating company, so the company that actually produces oil and gas on behalf of the people that own the rights to the oil and gas. They're no longer operating company. The operating company was out of Europe, and the owners of the resources were in the Middle East, in the country in the Middle East. Okay. So now one set of stakeholders are out of Europe, another set of stakeholders are out of the Middle East. Now, within the Middle East country, you also had the resources belong to the Ministry of Oil and Gas, but the people that write the check are the Ministry of Finance. So there's also that interface to manage. So you're managing your internal stakeholders between the operating company and the owners of the asset. And then within the owners of the asset, it belongs to one ministry, but the different ministry writes the check. And then depending on whether the equipment is downhole or surface, it is classified as either capital expenditure or something that is just operational expenditure. So again, it's all treated differently. And then within your own company, there are also multiple stakeholders. So no, it's very, very complex.
Right. Must be a nightmare to sell in. And in 2.5 years to do one transaction must be painful.
Yeah, ultimately, we ended up resolving to, rather than go for a 5-year contract, we ended up going for 5 + 1 + 1 because so it became a 7-year project rather than a 5-year project originally. It was supposed to be 3 + 2. We ended up going to 5 + 1 + 1 just because of the level of stakeholders and buy-in that one needed, to get that across to the finish line.
So let's take a step forward in terms of your career, your experience. You've been in oil and gas for like a multi-decade, right? In terms of your background, your expertise. What were some of the key frustrations that you saw in this buying process? Because it sounds like that you got to a point where you were just like, this is ridiculous that we seem to be going over again and again, or the same issues keep cropping up. So what did you start to see in terms of your, when you're in the kind of Halliburton, et cetera, and GE?
So different companies and different countries, address this differently. One of the recurrent theme was currency fluctuations. You're buying raw materials pretty much from around the world in order to be able to deliver the product that you're then going to use to deliver services around the world. So exchange rates could be extremely volatile. Now, when you're buying those products and services or the components that you use to build out your product, being able to source them effectively at certain prices that you can hold for an extended period of time, while you're holding it for an extended period of time, making sure that you're also not fighting the currencies and so on.
Yeah, right.
Can be quite challenging. And it doesn't just apply to the big companies around the world, even the smaller companies that are sourcing products, components from Europe, from Asia, from Latin America, and then the work gets done in one location. So doing a multi-currency transaction in order to be able to cost out one particular product before you can then sell it on to the end location was a regular problem that we encountered. Another one that we encountered on a regular basis was actually something that is as simple as where does ownership transfer and where does risk transfer? In the industry, it's known as Incoterms. A lot of projects come out without very clearly defined Incoterms because, again, depending on where you operate, a lot of people are not aware of the definitions of the different components of the Incoterms. So somebody can issue a bid and say, I wanted FOB Calgary, for instance. And on the seller side, because you don't want to offend the buyer, you don't go back and correct them and say, well, you can't have it free on board Calgary because FOB is typically for a vessel type transaction. So there is no seaport in Calgary. So when you use FOB Calgary, they probably mean X Works Calgary, in which case you're leaving it open to interpretation. And anytime you leave it open to interpretation, then things can get a little confusing, and you open up, means for finger pointing and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Another challenge that we encountered was actually things like straightforward communication.
Right.
How do you communicate to everybody at the same time so that everyone is on the same page?
Mm-hmm.
How do I make sure that I tell you that I want 10 kilograms of the red paint, and and you have 20 different people bidding for this particular, purchase.
Yeah.
So that how do I ensure that I've communicated that to everybody if I missed it in the first instance? So somebody can go through the requirements, the specification, and they come back with a question. And that question typically will come through emails, text messages even, and so on and so forth. But you then have to take that, structure it, and get it back out to everybody, okay? In order to be able to treat everybody fairly. So even structured communication in such a way that you treat everybody the same is also pretty challenging. Okay. So finding a way to treat everyone the same, make sure that everybody's bidding against the same set of criteria, even though you've circulated the scope of work and so on, but there will be questions, there will be clarifications, to do it effectively. Making sure that people are treated fairly at all, whether you're a big company or a small company, shouldn't matter, except of course, when you get to your evaluation, and if you do have predefined evaluation criteria and so on. So that begins to take you very, very deep into the structure of those challenges. But those are some of the things that you have to deal with, whether you're a big company or a small company, whether you're in North America, in Asia Pacific or Europe.
Yeah. And I'm always curious, like when I know I'm certainly guilty of doing this myself, but when let's say, particularly when I go out to, maybe less so in terms of products, but no, I think it would say maybe the same is true for products. You have an initial idea about how to solve that problem. You go out to the market, then you learn about the options, and then the scope changes, right? As the buyer, you go, actually, well, I don't want X, I now want X plus Y and that new fandangled thing. And so it's not like it's a static market, right? In terms of what the buyer expectation is. Would that be fair on a broader scale?
Again, it depends on the right answer is always, it depends. It depends on what you buy. Absolutely. If you're buying a laptop and you want, Intel chip with what type of processor and so on, that's pretty specific. But when you buy the combination of product and service, then it can be very, very wide. And the scope can creep very, very easily. So having a mechanism to address scope creep up front is very, very important. Not only that, by the time your bid is going out the door, understanding how you're going to evaluate it. And that is something that is missed by a lot of people, because it's not always price. It's not always delivery.
Yeah, so true.
There's so many things that can go into. If you're doing the basic 3 bits on a buy, then yes, okay, you're buying a 14-inch, IBM computer. That's from 5 different suppliers. And that's very easy to, that's a widget. That's very, very easy to evaluate. But once you get into very specific, very highly engineered products and services, or a combination of products and services, then understanding how you're going to evaluate it, documenting it, getting everybody's buy-in, and then finding a way to automate it so that you remove the subjectivity in the process is very, very, very.
Tell me about Rhone Soft now, because you've now built a whole company around basically making this process simpler. So just give us the elevator pitch in terms of Ator about what problem you're trying to solve there.
Kind of like talking about yourself, really not something that we're super excited to do, but all right. So what we want to do are 2 things. We want to drive shareholder value, and we want to simplify procurement. Really, that's it. But in order to drive shareholder value, you have to be able to buy smarter, right? In order to buy smarter, you have to be able to find information from multiple sources, cross-check them, cross-reference them, in order to distill the intelligence from that in order to make that decision. Okay. Hence the product and the name of the product, CrossChecker. So the product that drives the engine that drives the output, the engine that drives the result that we provide to our end users. It's called CrossChecker because it gives you the ability to cross-check all your facts, trend it, analyze it, distill it, so that you have a very measurable, quantifiable outcome.
Yes. And tell me in terms of the context, like who's it for? Like, is it me if I was a manufacturer or something like that? Let's say I'm in agriculture or something like that. I'm looking to source pesticide. Is this the type of thing I'd end up using?
I like the example you just gave. Agriculture, pesticides, herbicides, you name it. Okay. So the world is becoming more and more automated. And, large organizations are actually buying up smaller producers and so on. So that personal side of the agricultural business that you see in the mom and pop business in North America and certainly Australia, that's beginning to go away and big corporations are coming in. So it's becoming more impersonal. So it's becoming more transactional, more dollar value driven. If it is, yes. For you as a farmer, you're buying your pesticides, you're buying your fertilizer, you're buying the different seeds and grains and so on and so forth that you're going to be planting. You're looking for a certain quality type. You're looking for a certain yield type. You're looking for certain deliveries and discounts and so on. All of that information can be very easily put into a model that you can use. You can use on a consistent basis. You can use our software. Yeah,
go ahead.
Either the software or the service. So there is. Let me differentiate between the software and the service. When you have a product and you're buying it so that you can use it to get your end result by yourself, then really you're buying a product. Okay. Now for farmers generally speaking, and I'm generalizing here, I'm being very careful, but they want to stick to their core business. So we provide the service where they can now have the ability to buy as a co-op. Okay. Because we've got the tools. We're dealing with the same manufacturers, the same input providers. So all their information is on our platform. So rather than the farmer spending time, trying to negotiate the best prices and so on and so forth, we can do that on their behalf. That's one way to look at it. But for those more hands-on people that want to self-manage their accounts, the tool is there now for them so that all that history, all that information is right there. The analytics is right there. So you can use it as a farmer. Now we step away from the farmer and you want to get into more complex manufacturing. Same thing. You're still buying products and services. You want to know what the price trend is. You want to know what you bought this part number 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago. You want to see where there's a convergence or divergence in prices in the market so that you can begin to distill information on where you have excess inventory in the market, which might then lead you to buy more now so that you can hold a little bit because you can lock in better price. You can use it in that as well.
Got it. So it sounds like in many ways what you're building is the luxury of large organizations is they have these well-established, well-built out, well-resourced buying teams. And arguably this whole product is about kind of making the lone farmer having some sort of capacity which a much larger firm might have. Is that along the right lines?
Michael, we didn't script this. We absolutely did not script this. Okay. You've just described one of the segments in our business plan when we actually went out to build this.
Right.
Okay. So when we started the journey, we wanted to bring the large company capability to the average guy running $1 million, $2 million business. So yes, that's exactly what it is. We've taken the capabilities of highly sophisticated process and then broken it down into very easy to use, very easy to deploy product and service that we can get into anybody's hands up and running within 48 hours.
Yeah, right. I'm curious, just what do you think, actually, what have you seen, and this kind of ran out our conversation, is that big firms do so well compared to what the little man or the smaller operators typically do? What's your takeaways in terms of what they get or they do so differently?
Number one, by being able to buy at scale. So for you to be able to buy like Walmart, you have to be able to spend like Walmart, and the smaller people cannot. Okay. So that's number one. Two, the technology and the risk and the knowledge that those large corporations have. The small businesses don't have that. That's a significant differentiator.
Yeah.
Okay.
I get that.
And how do you solve for that?
Yeah. Well, that's tricky, right?
It's a yes and no. It is a yes and no. And the reason I say it's a yes and no is by having a platform similar to what we have and opening it up. So our platform, we don't use it strictly by ourselves. We actually open it up to other procurement professionals who already have the expertise, but not the tools to come in, certify on the product, and then they can use it to deliver services to their own end customers. So we now open it up so that other people can access the same level of knowledge and technical capability that large corporations have, that they would ordinarily not have.
Which then makes a lot of sense, because if you're helping, let's say, the smaller SME to $3 million turnover, basically your platform is about volume, right? And if you can increase volume, then everyone ultimately wins. So it's absolutely a bit like AI, right? In terms of how AI is leveling the playing field in many different uncomfortable ways for a lot of different people. Can turn me as a dyslexic and improve my spelling overnight, like instantaneously. It's extraordinary. So it's kind of like that, right? But by the sounds of things, Ator. And I'm curious, how do people respond? Because arguably you're solving a problem which many people don't even realize they have.
Yeah, that is absolutely. Okay, so it depends on who you talk to. If you talk to the decision makers, if you talk to the people that are accountable to the shareholders, to the investors, they absolutely want this. They absolutely want your service and solution like yesterday. If you talk to the people that are doing the job, then you have to navigate sensitivities because they feel that you're about to take over their job. So in order to navigate that, so back to the response, if you're talking to the business owners, the people that are responsible for the P&L, those people are inviting you to the next meeting almost immediately. If you're talking to the operations team, your messaging has to be a little different. So when we talk to the operations team, what we do is offer this service as a fractional service. That way, we do not replace them. So if you look at our website, for instance, we have managed procurement services, MPS 10. That's 10 hours of support every week. That way, we expand the capability of what they do. We improve the results that they deliver to their businesses without being a threat to their position.
Tricky one. I used to sell sales coaching, and you used to get a similar reaction from the business owner. Come on down, let's talk. And the sales manager was like, hell no, I never want to talk to you ever.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the way we've navigated that is to bundle the service and then break it down into, fractional supports so that we don't actually go in and replace anybody. Okay. So that way we drive the business improvement that we're looking for. We drive the return on investment that we're looking for, that the owner of the business is looking for without threatening anybody's job.
Yeah, got you. It's really, but innovation is an uncomfortable one to talk about, right? Because it's often, I know I used to work in another company when it was about improving, it was about refining. Yeah, initially there was a kind of a concern about, threatening or removing a job. It takes a lot to remove a full-time equivalent in terms of value. It's certainly not impossible. There's often ways to repurpose or often you're streamlining process, right? Something which they would have to do or doing at a higher level. And if you're helping them access purchasing at scale opportunities, but without having to be a Walmart, that's quite an attractive proposition and ultimately would free up capital within the organization to maybe do more. So, it's quite a strong proposition, as you say. Probably business owners is the right one to talk to, isn't it?
Yes, business owners, that's where we find the best reception. And then once we're through the door, then we work with the operational team and let them know that we're just there as an extension to them. Another way we presented to operational team is, all that number crunching stuff that you don't want to do, you don't have time to do, just let us take care of it. Okay. Yeah. So that you can work on the more value added side of your business. Okay.
I love that. It's, that's great. Ator, forgive me, I've got to press on here in terms of the time constraint, but I feel like we could keep talking about transactions and the reality of what it's like in big business. But I wanted to say a huge thanks for joining us on the show this morning. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I'm very excited to see where CrossChecker goes and the other Rhone Soft products that you've got coming. A massive thank you for connecting with us here on the Intelligent Performance Podcast. And look forward to following your journey in more detail.
Thank you very much, Michael. Really appreciate this opportunity. You have a great day.
You too.